Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Laurel Kays. I am based out of North Carolina State University Extension Forestry, and I help coordinate outreach for the Southern Fire Exchange. Also on the line today are David Godwin, our director, and Mary Nell Armstrong, who also helps coordinate outreach, and both of them are based out of the University of Florida. So today I'm excited to welcome you to our conversation with experts on prescribed burn associations from around the Southeast. For those of you who have attended our webinars in the past, today it's going to look a little bit different. In March, we hosted a webinar with Nick B. Miller, who works with the Ruffed Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society, and he talked about his research on PBAs and their applications for family forest landowners. So today we're going to talk to some of those folks involved with PBAs in the Southeast about their experiences on the ground and what that looks like. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And I'd like to go ahead and invite our panelists to turn on their videos. And I think starting with Mr. Benjy Strope, since he's in the top left of my screen, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your position and your relationship with the PBA that you work with and what that role looks like. So Benjy, go ahead.
Thank you, Laurel. I'm Benjy Strope. I'm a private lands management biologist with North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. My main job is managing the corporate cure program, where we do early successional habitat on swine farms, but part of that's also longleaf restorations, so that includes burning. And another part of my job is working with private landowners. So that's kind of where this PBA came about. So right now I'm the Bladen Lakes Prescribed Burn Association coordinator. It's not going to be like Jesse's, as you'll hear in a minute, but mostly what I do is I run a Google group where people can share when they're going to burn. And Phil, who can talk to this at some point, is the money man, so helps with prescribed burn education specialist. So
thanks, Benjy. So Phil, why don't you go ahead and go next, since Benjy mentioned that you work with the same group.
Okay, I'm Phil Wallace. I'm staff forester for Silviculture with North Carolina Forest Service. And I've been with the Forest Service for 17 years. The last 10 or so years, I've spent quite a bit of my time identifying barriers to prescribed fire on private lands and helping develop solutions to overcome those. Worked with Benjy there at the PBA, and we've developed a pilot program where we have mentors who can work with landowners and go out and actually help them in their quest to become a certified burner, helping them learn how to write that plan, and giving them that hands-on support after going through the certified burner license.
Phil, so Jesse, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Jesse Wimberley. I'm the coordinator with the Sandhills Prescribed Burn Association. We're located in the Sandhills region of North Carolina, and we cover about 7 counties. As the coordinator, this is a full-time job for me. When I started surveying our landowners and understood the demographic of landowners I'd be working with, we knew that it would be a very central role. The coordinator would play a very central role of the PBA. And we'll go into that a little bit further and more in depth as we move on. But the coordinator of the Sandhills PBA does play a very central role in making our work happen. So it's maybe a little bit different than other PBAs. We've been in operation since 2016. So we're about 5 years into the work.
Cool. So last but not least, John.
Yeah, my name is John Weir. I work at Oklahoma State University. I do extension research and teaching. Biggest part of my extension work is all prescribed fire training to landowners, agency groups that we work with. And one of the biggest things I do is work with prescribed burn associations. Helped form First Burn Association back in 1997 here in Oklahoma. Since then, I've helped form 40 plus burn associations in probably 9 different states. I'm also the president of the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association, which is an umbrella organization that we have for all of our burn associations here in Oklahoma. And we work at getting grant money for training, equipment, and things like that to help support our, currently we have 22 prescribed burn associations that cover about 36 of the 77 counties here in the state. So, again, quite a bit of experience working with burn associations and landowner groups.
Thanks. So we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but there is no one model for what a PBA looks like. They can be very different and operate very differently. So starting with Jesse, could you describe a little bit about how your PBA operates, what that looks like, what services you provide to landowners, those sort of things?
We have two missions with the PBA, and one is to create self-sufficient practitioners of RX fire on private landowners, helping private landowners become self-sufficient in using RX fire. The other mission is to kind of educate the larger population as to the necessity and value of RX fire. So when it comes to landowners, we started out by surveying about 200 landowners and wanting to know, are you interested in fire? If so, are you presently using fire? And what we learned was that 80% of our landowners were interested in fire, but only 20% were using it. So we took and we asked, what are the barriers for you to use fire on your land? And we took those and we developed a process to mitigate all those different barriers that for a reason that a landowner would not use fire. So we spend a lot of one-on-one time with landowners. And what we'll talk about as we get into this is there is no such thing as the typical landowner. I've got some that have thousands of acres of land and have been working on longleaf for generations. And I have some folks that come into the PBA who don't even know what a longleaf is and have never used fire in their life. So that becomes the real challenge, and it's a high touch operation. So you have to be able to know your landowners very well and have to develop a process that kind of meets them where they are and helps them move from interest to action in using fire, and has a very, what I would say would be an understandable and achievable process. That's what becomes so important. And let me step back real quick and make sure everyone understands when I say landowners, most of our folks manage their land as a part-time on the side. They have full-time jobs. So we try to tailor all our meetings, everything we do to fit in with folks who do not have, a whole lot of time for their management. They're very interested in it, but they don't have a lot of time. So we have to make sure whatever we're putting out there is doable to those landowners. And we can go into that in more detail. But two things that are very important is helping those landowners use fire on their land and creating an environment here in the Sandhills where other landowners in the larger community will support those early adapters of fire.
So Benjy, again, you sort of mentioned that your group is quite a bit different. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Differently than we run the operation is different, but as with Jesse, the landowners, it was the same kind of issues, the lack of education. They weren't self-sufficient. They didn't have the tools needed to be able to get the job done, to get fire on the ground if they were interested in it. So that's kind of where we just had a meeting, I think back in 2018, if I remember correctly, and we just had a meeting in Bladen County and got a group of guys together, or landowners and other interested people together. And this is what come out of it. They did not want a full-time coordinator. We got a couple of landowner champions, but but nobody wanted to take the reins of it full time. And of course, there was no one in neither my position or Phil's. That's not our job description really. So we actually found some money through TNC, I believe, at first, and we got these. They were retired Forest Service personnel, but they are now work temporaries as prescribed burn education specialists. So they can go out and meet the landowners where they're at, same as like what Jesse does, and to help them with their burn plans. We do have a burn trailer available now, and then they kind of do some of the go, no-go processing with the landowners. So.
And you said you also run a Facebook group that lets them sort of communicate
It's
about when they need help.
it's a Google group, not Facebook. So if anybody's going to do a burn, or if we have information to share, I post it on the Google group, and that way it goes to everybody, or they can share when they're going to burn as well.
Phil, did you want to add anything from your point of view?
Yeah, I'd just say, you know, we looked at the PBA there in Bladen, kind of basing it off the success that Jesse had and trying to replicate that. And, you know, Jesse's so much further ahead. I think you've been doing it. How long have you been doing that now, Jesse, with the Sandhills? 5 years. He's got his mic off. And we've only had this group together a little over a year, where we've been active and had the mentoring specialist, the prescribed fire education specialist available. So, you know, we're hoping we can build that to look something similar to what Jesse has done in time. Right now, you know, we're working with landowners trying to build that capacity to implement so that we can get it to where we have group participation from the landowner base.
Yeah, so John, I guess you're sort of in a slightly different position in that you've worked with quite a few PBAs, and you're also in a slightly different region. So are there any sort of trends that you see in how the PBAs tend to be organized, and any ways that those are sort of different in the places that you work?
Again, all the PBAs that I've worked with, you could probably put them all as every one of them's an individual. And I think that's the key to having a successful PBA, is letting those local folks in that community or that area that they've develop their own set of guidelines, their own way to operate, and it gives them comfort, you know, makes them more comfortable with it, helps them to just to establish things the way they feel comfortable with operating it. You know, granted, they're all, you know, they would all be kind of very similar in operation, but you know, they're very different. I've got some that are real lax, and you know, they don't really have much, don't have many meetings, don't have a whole lot of things. They just kind of get together and help each other burn. And we've got some that are very formal, have pretty formal, you know, have bylaws and ground rules and things that they go by and stuff. And which I think just, it's important to have, because you got to have some guidelines on equipment use and the way the burn association operates and the conditions they want to burn under, and how, you know, how the PBA is going to, you know, a PBA burn is going to be handled or conducted, just to keep people from going out saying, hey, I'm part of the PBA, I can do whatever I want. We've had a couple of instances like that. I know in Texas and also in Oklahoma where that's happened, and you know, caused some problems. But you know, that's a big part of it. So, you know, the deal is, I would say, don't get caught up in the bureaucracy of forming the PBA. Make sure everybody's comfortable with it. It's something that everybody can do and understand and get along. That's a big part of it. Like they were saying, like Benjy and Phil were talking about, you know, communications is a key, you know, letting everybody know and understand when burns are coming up. You know, how are you going to communicate that? That's a big way of doing that. And there's a lot of different ways out there. A lot of our PBAs use a group text app called GroupMe. That's one of their favorite ways to do it. And that way everybody, it can either go to your phone or your email, and they all use that. And, you know, again, a good communication string, so you make sure people know when the burns are, where they're going to be located at, and get more people there to help and do that. Because a lot of times some people feel they get left out, and they feel left out, so then they drop out and they're not wanting to be a part of it. And so the more people that they can feel like they're a part of something, it's always better and makes it good. Plus you also have you know, more people involved and helping out. That's the best part of it.
Yeah, so you sort of alluded to this, and so John, I'll just go back to you. But could you walk us through, at least for, you know, some of your PBAs that you've worked with, what does a burn look like in terms of go, no go decisions, in terms of letting people know when people arrive for the burn, mop up? Like, what does that actually look like logistically? And John, I'll go to you first since you sort of touched on it.
On how they, again, most of the PBAs worked with, they kind of established some kind of guidelines on how a burn is. All of them require you have a written burn plan, which we definitely try to, make sure that happens. Have a written burn plan. It's again up to the landowner to get their fire breaks in, and then some of the PBAs have, it's up to the landowner to call everybody or let everybody know we're going to burn. Others you have, kind of the president or whoever's kind of the coordinator in charge. They kind of communicate when you're going to burn and do that. People to go pick up the equipment to make sure it's on site and things are ready for doing that. You always really do seem to need a coordinator or somebody there that kind of oversees some stuff, making sure that the weather conditions are right, proper, and overseeing that kind of stuff. But again, some type of guidelines to follow, again, a minimum number of people that would be present to consider a burn. We're not going to burn if there's less than, 5 people on site or, whatever number that gets set up. Again, notifications that need to be done. Again, every state's different on what they have to do and doing that. Again, just following all state and local laws and guidelines and making sure that that stuff happens. Because again, that's the big part of it, is to making sure everybody understands that fire can be used safely and effectively in what they're doing. And as Jesse alluded to, there really is, there's 4 main reasons why people don't burn. If you look at it, liability is usually always listed as number 1. The people are concerned about risk of the fire. The second thing is you'll ask them, well, why aren't you burning? We don't have enough equipment. And the third thing would be, I don't have enough help to help me burn. And the fourth one would be, I don't have enough training or education or knowledge about fire. And so those 4 things are what PBAs should and do address, is those 4 things, is equipment. So again, we get neighbors helping neighbors. We pool equipment, we pool resources, we pool labor. So that takes care of two issues that you have, labor and equipment. Forgetting that, again, knowledge is gained through more experience, helping each other burn. The more burns you go on, the more knowledge and experience you gain from that. And then finally, the liability part of it is addressed by those other three items, as well as getting neighbors to work together to burn neighboring properties together. Instead of burning my 180-acre tract, let's get a hold of the neighbors on either side, because we've got a road over here and a creek over here. Pretty simple fire breaks. Let's burn on all 3 properties at once and make it simple. Again, that reduces risks and liability in a whole lot. And so those are the things that the Burn Association can do, should do, and kind of follow.
Yeah, thanks. So Jesse, do you want to walk us through similarly what a burn looks like for your group? Since you're the coordinator, are you the person who's sort of doing some of that notification, or how much of it is on you versus on the landowners?
Yeah, we kind of control that process, and all burns associated with the PBA need to come through the coordinator. We don't have people asking for help, from each other. We run it through the coordinator. And the reason we do that, and was something I learned very early on, before we will post a burn and invite people to it, that burn needs to be vetted by the coordinator. I will literally go out and walk the burn unit with that landowner, and make sure they are ready to go. And the reason we did that, and we learned it the hard way, what one person interprets being ready is not always the key. And you don't want people showing up to a burn and that burn is not ready to go. So I learned that early on, that each burn must be vetted by the coordinator. And then I announce when the burn is going to happen, what the description of the burn. That becomes important because different landowners have different objectives with their burning. And, we have different landowners that come to each burn depending on what our objectives for that one are. If it's a site prep burn, you're not going to get too many people to come to that. A lot of our landowners are trying to reintroduce burning into stands. So when we describe an in-stand burn and introducing it for the first time, that usually attracts a lot of attention. One thing that I will say, and what really makes a lot of our burns work, is we now call every burn a learning burn. And by that, we start out by doing a briefing, and we developed a protocol, a checklist of activities that need to be done in advance and activities that need to be done day of. So it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. Every landowner has a copy of the tasks that must be completed before we show up. And then we go over that with the group. And a burn that we just did recently, it was only 17, 20 acres, but it was a very technical burn. And we have a mentor that works with us, and that we have found that to be very important. And in this case, the mentor could work with the less experienced landowners on the exterior of the unit. And then I could take the more experienced landowners and go in and do internal ignition. So going back to what I originally said, it becomes very important to try to keep those landowners engaged in their, on the spectrum of experiences. So trying to have multiple experiences on the same burn becomes very important. And we've been able to accomplish that by having one group of people doing the ignition and then another group of people being interpreted what is happening, because they may have never been to a burn before and are not ready to have a drip torch, but they just want to observe and have somebody explain what is going on. It's very difficult to do all of that on the same burn unless you have a division of those experiences. So having a mentor with us to explain to the new folks what they're seeing, and then as people become more interested and more familiar with fire, then they can get a drip torch in their hand. And I think I should say right here, what I've learned very quickly is that creating a self-sufficient practitioner of fire is an accumulative effect. You just don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a fire practitioner. And one of the things that we've been able to do very successfully with our PBA here is work with all our sister organizations, including Phil there. And I've been working together quite a bit to stand up certification, North Carolina certified burner trainings around our region. And we've been getting capacity at each one of those. So our agencies play a hugely supportive role in making the PBA work. We would not be able to do our work if we didn't have a whole suite of partners who back us up at every step. So a burn is, like I said, it's a serious process now. And like I said, every burn is a learning burn, and we do a debriefing after the burn. So when you show up, you're gonna get an experience that meets your level of interest, and you're gonna go away with a new understanding.
Thanks. So Benjy and Phil, it sounds like from what you've said that your the way your group operates is a little bit less formal, right? So the burning ask is coming through the landowners through that Google group.
Yes, they will meet with the specialist beforehand, usually multiple times before any burning gets done. They'll go out, meet with the landowner, and Phil, check me if I'm wrong on any of this. They'll meet with the landowner, they'll help them write the plan, they'll make sure everything is good to go, and then they want to be on site, if the burn is conducted that day or whenever the burn will be conducted.
And that's the burn mentors that Phil was talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much like Benjy said, we're seeing right now, because we're still developing in that development stage. We just don't have the capacity within the landowner groups to say, hey, somebody's burning, you want to go help. We're kind of at a point with where we are where there's more one-on-one work, and mentors are helping that landowner. And we're getting some instances where, hey, they're pulling off a burn and another landowner will come help. But we're not to a point really where when we put that out there that we're getting a lot of, I think the landowners are feeling comfortable with participation to show up or make that contact.
So Jesse, you mentioned partners and that the agencies are really important. Are there any particular partners that you have worked with with your PBA that have been particularly crucial in success for you?
I'd say every partner we have, from the North Carolina Forest Service to Fish and Wildlife to NRCS, every one of those agencies plays a crucial role. And I think this might be a good point to kind of share with you a little bit of the way we reach landowners. It's a very unique process, and we call it speed dating. And when we move into a new area where we haven't done a lot of outreach, we'll invite all the landowners that we know, and that's using cooperative extension, Forest Service, all the folks who work with landowners. We'll invite them, and what we'll do is we'll have the landowners sit in the middle of the room, and I'll do an orientation about why we're interested in longleaf and fire, and we'll have every agency, including Benjy's group, Phil's group, everybody will be around the wall, and that landowner then can hear from each agency around the wall. Will stand up and spend 5 minutes saying, hey, I write management plans, I have cost share, I can help you with this, I can help you with that. And then after that orientation, each landowner can go and meet with the agency that fits where they are in their journey of longleaf restoration. And we're finding that works very well, to have a suite of agencies who support the PBA, I'd say is the crucial part of the success of our work.
So John, I'll send it to you next. And also there was a question in the chat, and we were talking about this beforehand, about what the difference is between prescribed fire councils and prescribed burn associations, and how those groups work together if they do.
Yeah, so the difference, so a lot of us are very familiar with prescribed fire councils. Prescribed fire councils are typically the agencies and groups within a state that work, promote, use prescribed fire. They're there for training, law, policy, working on the overreaching, getting more fire on the ground. A prescribed burn association is a group of landowners that are, yes, they're, as Jesse mentioned, they're assisted by a lot of partners. Without the partners, you couldn't have a PBA really work, because again, they provide a lot of input. But that PBA is the group of landowners trying to get fire on the ground. So again, as I said earlier, a prescribed fire council is again all that group of people working to do that. They should be supporting the burn associations in their state, whereas also the burn association should be a part of that council. So again, they're working for the same common goal, but again, they're different in their aspects. And even in our formation, so we have a state burn association group, the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association. We're still, again, our work is mainly divvied up to promote and work for all the burn associations. Again, that's any part of prescribed fire in the state that we can do. And again, we're part of our Oklahoma Prescribed Fire Council, and we're also a member of the coalition, the National Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils as well. So hopefully, just, again, they're similar, but they're very different, because again, like I said too, the PBAs are there to apply fire on the ground. The councils are there to make sure that fire can be applied on the ground throughout the state, and how do we get more fire on the ground. And again, like I said, the councils should be supporting burn associations, again, because that's getting more fire on the ground for private landowners on doing that. And I can mention too, like Jesse said, the partners that we have is just immense with what we've got. Our partners here that we've worked with Oklahoma for several years, again, is our state NRCS is a big supporter, big donor to what we can do. Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, Oklahoma Conservation Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners Program. TNC has been a big help with us on that. Quail Forever, National Wild Turkey Federation. Again, I'm going to leave some people out. Playa Lakes Joint Venture, Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture. So we've had a lot of great partners. And actually, since OPBA formed in 2012, I was just figuring up earlier, we've received $526,000 in grants and stuff from these groups in the state. Again, that's going to help pay coordinators that we have working at different PBAs, kind of very similar to what Jesse's doing, except a lot of them are landowners. They're the landowners within that PBA. Again, they're not getting rich, getting paid to help, but it helps offset the time. It takes some time and work to, maintain a PBA. And it's just to kind of help them do that. Equipment helps provide training and different things that we've had throughout. So it's very big support and very important to have that kind of support and look for that funding too, because you got to remember those PBAs too are made up of landowners. They don't have time to go out and find grants for equipment and things like that. Also, a lot of them don't, they don't know where to go to get those. Again, us as agency people, we already have the contacts, we already have that knowledge, so we need to help support them in that way, and that's what we do. A bunch of us work throughout the state to help support those local burn associations in that way.
We'll come back to the funding piece in a minute, but I want to get to Benjy and Phil. And since you're in a little different position, since you are agency folks who are helping out the PBA, but have you had similar experiences in terms of sort of a broad net of partners?
Absolutely. We wouldn't be able to do this without them, without Phil helping with procuring funding and managing that. TNC, or the Nature Conservancy, got the original grant. It was a NIFWIF grant, I believe. Phil can correct me on that if I'm wrong. U.S. Fish and Wildlife support, cooperative extension support. It was just, it was a whole host of everybody that got together and we got it rolling. So it takes a village.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what everybody else said, but the partners are important. In addition to the TNC and NIFWIF funding that we have supporting the members, we've also used the landscape scale restoration grant for the U.S. Forest Service, and we're using that funding to expand the concept to other areas in the state, both on the coast, in the Duvern area, and then also some projects where we're getting good support up in the western part of the state and the mountain regions. So without the various funding partners and partners to help implement the program, I don't think we can pull this together.
So Jesse, Benjy and Phil mentioned National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and landscape scale conservation, their landscape scale conservation grant as big funding pots for them. Where have you found support for your PBA in terms of finances and funding?
Yes, my funder is also NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They have a grant that's targeted towards engaging private landowners, and that's where our funding comes from.
John, is that similar to what you see out in the Midwest in terms of where funding comes from?
A lot of them is, again, like I said, from a lot of the wildlife related agencies and stuff that do that. Again, also NRCS is a big promoter, even in other, I know Texas and Kansas has definitely seen more of that with that. So again, every state's a little bit different, but those funding groups, Pheasants Forever is probably a big group, especially in Nebraska. They do a lot of funding and work with the burn associations in Nebraska. So there's a lot of funding opportunities out there. Again, just got to work and look for them. Again, when they can see that that's going to get fire on the ground, that, buying equipment and training people and educating folks about fire, it's not a difficult challenge to find that money out there for that.
And a follow up to that, and I'll just let anyone chime in if anyone has had a similar experience, but I've heard from some folks in other pots of funding that are maybe less directly related to natural resources and wildlife, and folks who are more familiar with prescribed burning already, that have had a little bit of pushback at various points of like, oh, what is, a PBA? I'm not sure if that's a sustainable thing to fund. Has that been something that you have ever encountered or heard about, or have you ever had to do like some education with your funding partners of like, this is what we're doing and why it's important and why it makes sense? I'll give everyone 5 seconds, and if not, then I'll assume the answer is a resounding no, which is good.
What I've seen is not so much resistance to the concept, but concern over short planning horizons. We recently had a group that applied for some funding for a PBA coordinator in the mountains, and I was involved in some of the conversations, but I wasn't part of the application process. However, my understanding was that because this funding was on a one-year planning horizon, it just really wasn't a good fit for the grant, and that's something we struggle with the funding we have. That they're usually done on 2 or 3 year planning horizons, and this is something that it's a program that's built over time. And Jesse's been doing this for over 5 years. His program's still growing. We've been active a year and a half, 2 years in the Bladen Lakes area, and that program is just getting its feet under it. So Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah. So you've all talked about sort of some of the big benefits of PBAs in terms of providing capacity and training and equipment and some liability work and that sort of thing. One of the things that Nick talked about in his webinar in March was some of the challenges that are also associated with successful PBAs, including things like, the fact that you're very dependent on people volunteering their time, the fact that landowners tend to be older, burn windows are very narrow, liability is always a concern. Are these things that you have also seen in your work on the ground? And if so, what are some things you've done to address them? I'll go ahead and let Jesse go first since his mic is already off, or on rather.
Yeah, and that's actually been a big focus of our work, and that is how do we create a process that works for folks? And so with some of our larger landowners and some of them that are a little bit older, they're never going to have the ability to burn all their land. So what we find is that we also need to have a list of contractors that we have vetted and worked with, that we can say to those landowners who have more than they can burn, or who may like to see a contractor burn their land first and then take over afterwards. We found that to work very well, to have a list of contractors that we can share with folks. The other thing that's been very successful for us, and this sometimes goes in the opposite of using a contractor, is we try to get our landowners to break up their farms into manageable units. Like instead of burning 100 acres, in a single burn, we break those up into 10 or 15 acre units that can be burned in a couple of hours. And the reason that becomes important is we are also starting to move our landowners towards growing season burning. And the reason we're doing that is A, the conditions are a lot calmer for the burner, but B, and remember, most of our burners have full-time jobs, so they're burning on the weekends or in the evening. So about this time of year, you can come home from work and burn 20 acres in a couple of hours into the evening, and you're good to go. So those are the two strategies we're using: being able to contract out those burns that are too difficult or large or a companion to the landowner, and then helping the landowner strategically break up their farms into manageable units that they can then burn in short windows.
John, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, that's a lot of really good stuff on that. And that's the same thing. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what we do, or what I've seen our PBAs that I work with doing. So again, number one, people make the PBA. It's like any program there is. The people make that program that are there. So you have good people that work there. They do that. The problem you get to see in a lot of times, those good people, those good landowners that are like that, they're also the same people that volunteer for all the other committees, all the other boards. They're on a lot of things that are going on. So they get spread out and get spread pretty thin. One of the things that we have done that has worked really well and has been a great benefit, we were able to get a grant from the NRCS to help fund this, is we hired, currently we have 5 regional coordinators that are kind of scattered throughout the state that work with very different PBAs. All the ones we have are actually retired NRCS employees that have retired. They help the PBAs write burn plans. They go out and help them burn, help start new PBAs and do that. And that's been a great asset to keeping our PBAs going and starting new ones. within that. And then also we've identified certain PBAs where we've got some real active presidents, that are in charge of the burn association, and they're a local coordinator is what we call them, and we pay them to help write burn plans and to conduct burns and do that. Again, that helps to keep them from getting burned out. It gives them a little bit of reconciliation for what they're doing and stuff, and that's been a big plus for doing that. The other thing is we got to remember again that not everybody's a burn boss, and that's the deal, and that's what the PBA is there for, is to identify key people that can be burn bosses. You don't want everybody is not a burn boss, or not. There's a lot of people I've burned with that I would not want them to lead a fire, but I want them to work on my fire because they're very good workers, they're hard workers, but they're just not leadership people, and that can handle that. But there are people that can step up and become leaders, and that's a big part of what a PBA does, is help train those people and bring them up and nurture them and do that. And that's the thing we got to remember, that everybody needs to be involved and everybody has a role. One of the best examples, I know one of the burn associations that I work with a lot, they've got an older couple that are actually in their 80s, and they're pretty much at every burn that they do. They bring their side by side. They run up and down the fire break, and they haul water to people to drink, and they haul torch fuel. They've got a role, and they can't physically get out and really do anything, but man, that's what they do is an important part of every burn. And so making sure that everybody's a big part of it is important. Also branching out, again, a lot of the burn associations do try to work with members that are absentee landowners that want to burn, that can't actually be there to help them burn. A lot of times they'll donate money to help, update equipment, buy new equipment, do things like that. And that's a big part of it. And then also, as we said, just like Jesse, growing season burns have become increasingly popular right now. From all the work of last few years, growing season burns are 25% of all the burns that the PBAs here in Oklahoma are doing now. So they're spreading their burn seasons out. The most popular time of the year is February, March, and April around here to burn. But then again, they're burning in about 9 months of the year now. So, we're spread that burn season out. And again, that's what educating those groups can do. It spreads that stuff out and information and gets that information out. And again, it gets more fire on the ground overall.
Benjy and Phil, did you want to add anything in terms of overcoming issues you faced in keeping your PBA running?
Well, for the past 2 winters, it would need to quit raining so the PBA could even get started. We couldn't even get fire breaks in most of the time. It was so wet around here. But yeah, we still work on it. We still keep going. So.
Yeah, I think with the Bladen Lakes area PBA, I think one of our biggest challenges is number of burn days we have in a given year. There's a huge push toward growing season burning and taking advantage of those opportunities. But most of the landowners we end up working with are trying to reintroduce fire into what will be pretty heavy fuels in an area where you have a lot of volatile, especially in the growing season. And that becomes our biggest challenge, is getting those landowners, getting their hands into a maintenance phase where we can transition to a growing season burn.
I want to take a couple of questions that came into the Q&A box while we still got the time. So I'll just go ahead and read the question, and then whoever wants to jump in can go ahead. So Christine is working down in South Florida, east of Everglades National Park, and was hoping to look for guidance on forming a PBA in that place where they aren't really getting support at the local or state level for burning. Does anyone have any thoughts on things that might be helpful for her?
Is there a group of interested landowners that y'all could meet and just get it started? That's kind of what we did here at Bladen Lakes. Just go for it. But you got to have that support there. And it sounds like it might be a tough road to hoe there if there's no local support. But
yeah, and I'm not sure if that local support is local agencies and government support versus local landowner support. But it sounds like having that base of interested landowners is really sort of the the number one key to getting the PBA started.
You're exactly right, Laurel. It's going to be key. So.
Yeah, I would add into that. Usually, in any given community, there's going to be a landowner who is looked to by the broader community as an authority, so to speak. That spark plug landowner who people will listen to, has the trust of the community, and if you can get that person on board with what you're trying to do, other people just kind of naturally fall in. But finding that really outgoing landowner that's well supported in the community, that seems to be also one of the keys.
So Terry asked, how does a PBA get involved if there is a wildfire started by a negligent neighbor? Or do they get involved?
I can answer. I know several of our PBAs in Oklahoma. I know several in Texas. A lot of times they've got just as much equipment as some of the local volunteer fire departments. So they bring their equipment. If there's a fire in the neighborhood, they'll come and assist. They'll come and help. People will call. Again, as more landowners get more equipment to help them burn, again, they're out there to be able to help and do that. I know every state's different. Different things are going on, but that's, again, I've seen a lot of that. And again, that helps build more public support for the PBA, because again, they're seeing what they're doing, what they're helping out within that community, as well as also seeing what their fires are doing to help control or contain, stop wildfires that are going on.
Does anyone else's PBA get involved in any aspect in terms of wildfire suppression, or even just like public communication related to any wildfire instance you've had?
This is Jesse. We have not been involved with any wildfires, but certainly we have several incidents where there was a wildfire that decreased in its intensity when it reached one of our landowners' property who was engaged in prescribed fire. So I think we're adding greatly to the reduction of wildfire potential by getting more fire on private lands.
There was also asking just for some clarification, I think in the Sandhills PBA, maybe also for the Bladen Lakes folks, that those, the mentors in the Bladen Lakes area, and Jesse, you as the coordinator in the Sandhills PBA, those are all paid positions, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
We've got the funding we're utilizing. We hired two folks part-time to assist there in the Lake County area. We're looking to expand that concept in other areas of the state. Those are paid part-time positions. Folks who have many years of both prescribed fire and wildland fire experience.
So Joseph was asking if there have been any problems with the public, and I'll sort of expand that to if you do any sort of public outreach and education in your area with the PBAs you work with.
This is Jesse. As I mentioned early on, that is equally as important as getting the landowners up to speed with using fire. We find it equally important to get the larger community up to speed on the necessity and value of fire. And the reason we did that, as John has alluded to, it's usually pretty high up on the reasons that landowners don't use fire, is pushback from the general population. So that's a big part of what we do. And as I said, we're part of a larger partnership, and we have a fire festival here in our area every year to do that very thing, where we invite the entire population out, school groups, everybody. And we actually do a demonstration burn. I think the last one we did, we had several hundred people observing a burn. And this goes a long way in demystifying what a burn is and what it is not, and why it's important. So I could not stress more how important it is for us to educate the larger population as to the value of RX fire. So it's a big part of what we do. And we go so far, we have a website, we have Facebook pages, we do a lot of strategic placement of articles in mainstream journals that, where folks would not be looking for information on fire, for that very reason, to try to get that playing field even for those early adapters of fire. Very important.
I'd also add on, on the importance of the burn association, again, not only educating the public and doing that, again, promoting fire on that, but also probably the strength in numbers part of it, that you've got a group of people that are all there using fire, promoting fire, and doing that. A couple of great examples of that. We've had one in Oklahoma. We have a law that the county commissioners in a county can pass a burn ban if conditions seem to warrant that. One of the local burn association members one time asked me, he goes, if you'll notice, you'll never see a burn ban in our county. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, number one, he said, our county commissioners know that fire is important. We talk to them and do that. But he said, mainly that if they put one on, we'll find some new ones, So again, that strength in numbers, we're going to do that. Same thing has happened in Sonora, Texas example. They had a local business guy said that the local burn association started a fire and burned up some of his equipment around an oil field site. They went and looked at it, and the site was 2 miles upwind. So, there's nothing, fire didn't creep all the way back there. There wasn't an ember that went against the wind. So the burn association members went to the guy and said, hey, you put a story in the paper about us that was bad and did all that. He said, you need to retract that, or, we're going to quit doing business with you. The next day there was a apology in the paper. Again, strength in numbers about that. Again, also being able to change law, to change policy about things. You've got a core group of people, and these are landowners. Again, they're not agency people. These are landowners that can do that. So that's a big plus with the burn associations.
Benjy and Phil, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess we're set up a little bit differently with burn associations here in North Carolina, and this is where Benjy and I are both agency people trying to facilitate cooperation among private landowners and managing, being able to handle the formal stuff like the funding and the outreach and the messaging around it, but keeping things informal for those landowners, so that they're not getting caught up in the day-to-day administration. I've heard Jesse say, if you ask a landowner if they want to come and show up to meetings, you're going to get a resounding no. And more informal we can kind of keep that, really seems to help facilitate things. So getting involved in those disputes, I don't know how willing the landowners here would be to do that versus what John's experienced there around Oklahoma.
Okay, so we have time for, I think, one last question, which is just someone was wondering if there are any sort of best management practices that you have found in reaching out to individual landowners or just working with landowners in general as part of your PBA. And Benjy, I'll go to you first.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, are there any sort of big lessons learned, big best management practices that you have found in working with individual landowners and reaching out to them to be part of the PBA?
We've had meetings. I don't know if there's any best way to do it. You just have to do it. And it's going to be, I think, different for everybody, really. The original meeting took place in Bladen County. Then a year later, we had a second meeting in Sampson County, which gained our membership up to about 45 people, which I think we need about twice that to really become an effective PBA. So, with that, and then COVID hit. So then that kind of, I was planning on doing some group get-togethers and stuff like that here at the local state park. I was go cook up some supper and, invite everybody, not even to have to talk about burning, just do some socializing to get that neighbor on neighbor aspect of it. But with the COVID outbreak stuff, we can't do any of that right now. So that's kind of been an impediment to it, but we'll get there.
And Laurel, I would jump in right there and say, we've touched on it several times, but I'd like to reiterate, know your landowner, know the demographic that you're working with and what their life is like. And in my case, small landowners, full-time jobs. So we make sure everything we're doing fits with that. But at the end of the day, we know what landowners want. You got one landowner who needs to get 20 acres burned. We have another one that needs to get a drip torch in their hand. Two negatives become one positive, just trying to bring people together where they can help each other out. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about it. We actually just go out and get it done. And I would say to an earlier question, especially in the Southeast, there is a tremendous interest in RX fire, and a lot of public agencies are working on that and would welcome private landowners becoming involved with that. So I doubt you would find a place in the Southeast where there's not a public agency who's tasked with getting more fire on the land and would love and welcome private landowners becoming involved. So I would say to any private landowner, reach out to those folks, those agencies, your Forest Service, your wildlife agencies, all those folks are looking to engage private landowners, because at the end of the day, most of the landscape that we need to get fire on is privately held. So we need to find out a process that works for that demographic and then get the support of all the public agencies to help make that happen.
We are at the hour, but John, I'll just give you 1 minute if you had anything you wanted to add on that point.
I agree with Jesse tremendously. He's got some great resources, done a great job there in North Carolina with all that he's done since he's got that going. Again, that is a part, every PBA is going to be different because they're people, they're made up of people. And so again, working with what you have, not against it, but working with them, again, if they need to have their hand held, we need to hold their hand. If not, let them go, give them enough leash to do what they need to do, but you're just there to provide technical assistance and support. That's the biggest part of it, is doing that. That's what the agency folks do, is provide technical assistance and support. Like I said, going to meetings, finding funding, helping them pick weather windows, helping them to pick out equipment, help them to do whatever they can do to get it going. At the end of the day, the PBA is the landowners. It's that group of people's organization, and it should be led by them. And but they just need help and guidance to go along with it.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I know we have run out of our time, and I want to let people go right at the hour. So thank you all for your great questions. And of course, thank you to our panelists for such a great conversation. If you do want to follow up with them, their contact information is on the screen, as is mine. So Jesse, Phil, and Benjy, and John, thank you so much for your time today. This was great. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope we see you at a webinar in the future. I hope everyone has a great day and a great week.
Thank you.